This financial crisis has really shaken the foundations of capitalism in some people's minds, really made them ask fundamental questions about the way businesses are run, and made them look at maybe other structures that could provide a better and safer alternative in times of crisis. Now, one model which has been examined by Cass Business School is employee-owned businesses. That is, things like the John Lewis Partnership. Research by Dr. Ajay Bhalla and Professor Joseph Lampel has found they hold up particularly well. I asked them for details.
The sector itself is about worth 25 billion in the UK, contributes about 2% of GDP to the UK economy. And what we did was, first of all, we looked at the EOB population, employee-owned business population within the UK, and we contacted or were sponsored by employee-owned business organization, which has about 77 members in terms of its employee-owned businesses. Now, these are the people, those who classified themselves as employee-owned businesses. And what we did was we contacted all these companies individually and talked to them in person. We constructed a survey which was done telephonically, and we also then looked at the peers of these companies in terms of their sectors. So if we were looking at companies in the engineering and design consultancy, we looked at the non-employee-owned businesses in the engineering and design consultancy. So we looked at the top 5 competitors in terms of non-employee businesses, and then we constructed a database from publicly sources information. So about total population of non-EOBs was more than 200 non-employee-owned businesses and about 50 employee-owned businesses in our final database.
So what are your key findings?
We looked at, first of all, in terms of the performance of EOBs versus non-EOBs before the downturn and after the downturn, as the economy is picking it up. So what we see is that, first of all, that employee-owned businesses do not perform as well as non-employee-owned businesses between the period of 2005 to 2008, which is a period before recession.
But when the recession hits?
When the recession hits, employee-owned businesses perform equal or if better than non-employee-owned businesses, particularly in terms of sales. So their sales are way up and way above non-EOBs. And also in terms of profitability. Now, profitability, both overall profitability and profitability per employee.
Professor Lampel, so what are the lessons of your research? How will the world change as a result of this?
I think we've showed that EOBs is not only a viable model, okay, it's very much sustainable. It's a resilient business model, okay, which means it survives and prospers during time of adversity as well as during good times. It doesn't offer the same kind of supercharged, shareholding capitalist model that you have in the rest of the corporate sector, admittedly. Okay, so it's much more, in some ways, it has a sort of a go steady and move forward model of doing business. So in terms of looking at EOBs and seeing a model, a different growth model, other corporate businesses can imitate that. But I think also there are other issues that arise in EOBs, which I think exist in all organizations, is the degree to which you can maintain the EOB advantage as the organization goes larger and larger. One of the key issues we focused on in this particular study is the fact that EOBs tend to work very well when they are small or medium at best. As they grow larger, the employee ownership advantages tend to dissipate. Tends to dissipate because you have more managerial levels. You have longer the relationship, more people. The relationship between the governance mechanism and voice becomes looser. So therefore, in some respects, you lose some of that advantage unless the organization works very hard to reconnect with the employees, to engage with them, to create new kind of structures and participation systems that allow voice to go all the way to the top. In that respect, it's not unusual in the EOB sector as opposed to non-EOBs. The lessons are basically the same.
Question for both of you, really. This research was commissioned by the John Lewis Partnership, which is probably the best-known employee-owned business in the world. What are the lessons that John Lewis can teach everyone else.
One of the key things in terms of the John Lewis is that John Lewis is one of the few companies which has retained the EOB advantage at the size of the scale at it operates. So in case of John Lewis, we have 65,000 employees, and it's one of the largest employee-owned businesses operating globally, compared to what we see in terms of the small businesses, where employee-owned businesses tend to perform better when they are below 75 or just about there in terms of employee numbers. So what we see in case of John Lewis is a company operating at 65,000 employees still outperforming, or if not better, in terms of its sales and performance than Tesco's or Sainsbury's or its competitors by and large. And one of the key reasons of that is that it operates a pure stakeholder model in terms of the way it is structured, in terms of the governing council, the partnership council, right down to the operational level employees. And it's done certain things which are sort of very right, in terms of what we have is operational employees have great amount of decision-making power. There is a great flexibility, and they have a greater say in terms of decision-making, and they are sort of listened to by the top managers.
I think one of the things important to note about John Lewis is they have the service advantage in Britain. Okay, they supply really superb service to customers of the level to retail service that is very rare in Britain. And the employee ownership model fits very nicely into this model. So the employees are motivated and they are empowered to provide service. They are empowered to provide service under unusual circumstances, so they are very flexible. And one of the reasons that John Lewis can do that is because they are not as much under pressure to deliver quarterly earnings and deliver increasing return to investors, to the degree to which they have to compromise, A, on employee morals, because in finance we're talking about retail workers, and B, in terms of trying to squeeze every penny out of the relationship with the customers. So they do mind costs. Costs are important, or prices are important, but at the same time, their key strength is service. And it's important for other organizations that look at John Lewis to ask that question in the British context in the long term is, how do we provide good service to our customers? And one of the ways to provide good service to customers is to give them a contract or give them a relationship that will bind you to the organization, and through the organization bind you to the customers.
Isn't the real problem with this that it almost changes the rules of capitalism, because it takes investors out of the picture? They can't invest, by definition, in employee-owned businesses.
I don't think it changes the rules of capitalism. Investor-driven capitalism is only one kind of capitalism. The investor is always an important part of the configuration of capitalism, but it cannot be the dominant part of capitalism. Capitalism is a system made of multiple parts, and in fact is dangerous for capitalism when any part of the system comes to dominate the rest of it, to the point where the system itself can collapse, as we saw recently. So the point is that investors, can invest in businesses such as, John Lewis, in a variety of ways. But in the end, the fundamental story of employee businesses is that there is more to capitalism than just simply shareholder value.
Professor Joseph Lampel, Dr. Ajay Bhalla, thank you very much indeed.